You ever get that feeling that your brain has a mind of its own? Well, it turns out it kinda does. It's running on this hidden software, a whole set of rules and shortcuts that shape your reality without you even realizing it. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on 3 of these incredibly powerful mind-bending rules.
So let me start by asking you a question that gets right to the heart of who you are. I want you to think of your most powerful, vivid childhood memory. Go ahead, really picture it. You got it? Okay. Now, are you 100% sure that it's real?
Yeah, the answer, and this is a little unsettling, might actually be no. And that brings us to our very first fact. You can't always trust what you remember. It's way more flexible and, honestly, a lot more creative than most of us give it credit for.
This leads us to a concept that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it is shockingly real. It's called memory implantation. Yep, this is a proven technique where researchers can literally plant a completely false memory into your mind and make you believe you experienced something that never ever happened.
See, here's the fundamental thing we all get wrong. We tend to think of our brains as being like a video camera, just perfectly recording the past. But it's not like that at all. Memory is an active reconstruction. Every single time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it from scratch, and it fills in the gaps to make the story make sense. And that process, it can be totally influenced by new information, by suggestions, or even just by the mood you're in today.
A classic study called the Lost in the Mall technique shows just how easy this is to do. Researchers would get real childhood stories from a person's family, but then they'd sneak in one that was totally fake, a really detailed, believable story about getting lost in a shopping mall. And the result? A surprising number of people didn't just believe the fake story was true, they started to remember it, even adding their own little details that never happened.
You think that's wild? Oh, it gets crazier. In another experiment, researchers took a childhood photo of a person and just photoshopped them into a hot air balloon, something they'd never done. And yet, a staggering 50% of them eventually created a false memory of that ride. Half of them. All it took was one fake photo. So, if our brain can fool us about our own past, what about the present? Well, it turns out our perception of our own abilities can be just as messed up, and this brings us right to our second fact, the confidence illusion.
Charles Darwin wasn't a psychologist, but man, he absolutely nailed this one. This quote perfectly sets the stage for a cognitive bias that I guarantee you have seen in action, even if you didn't have a name for it.
It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And simply put, it explains why the people who know the absolute least about something are often the most confident that they're experts. You see, they don't just lack the skill, they lack the self-awareness to even realize how unskilled they are.
This whole effect creates this really weird paradox. So on one side, you've got people with low ability who are kind of doubly cursed. Not only are they making mistakes, but they're so incompetent they can't even recognize their own mistakes. And then on the other side, you have the true experts, who often underestimate their own competence because they just assume that the task is as easy for everyone else as it is for them.
And just how big is this gap between perception and reality? It's huge. In the original study, the people who scored at the very bottom, we're talking the 12th percentile on a logic test, on average rated their own performance as being in the 62nd percentile. They thought they were well above average, when, in reality, they were near the bottom. That is a massive, massive blind spot.
Okay, so we've looked inside the mind, at memory and self-perception. For our third and final fact, let's look outward, at just how easily our own judgment can be warped by the people standing right next to us.
We are social animals. That desire to belong is an incredibly powerful driver of our behavior. It's so powerful, in fact, that famous experiments have proven that most of us would rather give an answer we know is wrong than dare to disagree with the rest of the group. Our need to fit in can literally make us distrust what we're seeing with our own 2 eyes.
And when you throw an authority figure into that mix, that pressure to conform turns into something way darker. The infamous Milgram experiment showed us something terrifying. Most ordinary people, when instructed by a scientist in a lab coat, were willing to deliver what they thought were excruciating, even dangerous, electric shocks to a total stranger. It proved that our obedience to authority can just steamroll right over our own conscience.
Now add the anonymity of being in a crowd, and you get this phenomenon, de-individuation. You know, when we're part of a huge group, especially if our identity is hidden, we can lose our sense of self. Our inhibitions just drop, our personal feeling of responsibility melts away, and we become capable of things we would never, ever dream of doing by ourselves.
So, we've got faulty memories, a distorted view of our own abilities, and this deep, powerful urge to conform. You might be thinking this all sounds, well, kind of bleak. But understanding these hidden rules is actually the opposite of bleak. It's incredibly empowering.
Look, the big takeaway here isn't that your brain is broken. It's not. These shortcuts and these biases, they exist for good evolutionary reasons. They helped us survive, but you don't have to be a slave to them. The very moment you become aware of these hidden rules is the moment you can start to choose when you want to follow them. Awareness is the first step to control.
So here's what you can actually do with all this. First, just be a healthy skeptic of your own really powerful memories, especially if they were suggested to you by someone else. Second, practice a little intellectual humility. Be open to the idea that you might not know as much as you think, and be ready for feedback. Third, find the courage to think for yourself, even when you're the only one in the room saying something different. And finally, when you see these patterns in others, you can use that to better understand why they're behaving the way they are.
So, knowing all this, that your mind can be tricked into creating fake memories, that it can be blind to its own limits, and that it can be easily swayed by a crowd, what changes for you? Knowing these secrets is one thing. The real question is, what are you going to do with them?